The idea of remaking every movie ever made and many times over is just getting tiring. It's a pathetic waste of imagination, and Hollywood producers should make something new. It's like wiping your ass on the same toilet paper again and again. It just keeps getting shittier. But to be fair, remakes can be done well, and the science fiction genre depends somewhat on special effects, and this is one category in which remakes can improve. But the 1950s were the golden age of science fiction movies. Movies involving space exploration, science experiments gone wrong, and of course, alien invaders. So let's take a look at some of the classic invader movies and their remakes. In order for it to make the list, the original has to be from the 50s and the aliens have to come to us. Check it out, there's going to be 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to look at The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Thing, and Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. First, The Day the Earth Stood Still. The original classic from 1951 is often considered to be one of the greatest science fiction films of all time. It's immediately lovable right from the opening title screen. That Bernard Herrmann music just sends chills down my spine every time I hear it. So you have a flying saucer, a humanoid alien in a spacesuit named Klaatu, and a robot named Gort that shoots lasers. Right there, it's fun and instantly appealing to any classic science fiction buff. But the camp value is only a disguise because this movie goes much beyond that. Klaatu doesn't come down to destroy the people of Earth, he comes to save us from ourselves, to tell us to stop all wars, but instead he's treated with hostility and has to go into hiding. He lodges in someone's house, just a regular middle-class family. He makes friends with a young boy and scientist, sharing his intellect and ambitions for world peace. It sounds a little preachy, but it's an entertaining movie, it's well written, and worth a watch any day. The robot Gort is just the icing on the cake. And of course there's the famous command, Klaatu Barada Nikto.
Klaatu Barada Nikto.
I've never understood why, but this line has been parodied so many times, it's unbelievable. The first time I heard it was in a Ninja Turtles episode, Invasion of the Turtle Snatchers.
A Nikto would not have hurt you.
I figured that out, but where are we? And who are you?
I am Klaatu, and this is the little woman, Barada.
Also, when analyzing the movie, a lot of people have compared Klaatu to Christ. He comes to Earth, he's shot down by authorities, then he's resurrected, delivers a message of peace, and finally ascends back to outer space. The MPAA didn't like this, and they made them add this line here.
He has the power of life and death?
No. That power is reserved to the Almighty Spirit.
It's a good movie and it has an anti-war message, and even though the movie's nearly 60 years old, that message can still be applied today. However, Hollywood big shots feels if they have to remake it, and no doubt it takes all those issues about war and tries to make them more contemporary. But like I said, what's the point of when you can already apply it to any time period? It just takes a little imagination. But here's what I think about the remake. As its own movie, it's okay. It obviously has a lot of special effects and updates the message for world peace, but it also elaborates on some things from the original, like how Klaatu is able to take control of machinery, which is kind of interesting. Keanu Reeves is actually really good as Klaatu, and it's funny I say that because if you look at a lot of movies he's in, he has no emotion. But here, it's appropriate. His posture, blank expression, and monotone voice fit the role. The rest of the cast is okay. Jennifer Connelly and Jaden Smith do their job. John Cleese is great as the professor, but he doesn't really have much screen time. Gort is CG as expected. He's the only recognizable image from the original. I can't help but feel that he doesn't really have much purpose in the plot. He exists just because he's cool. Without Gort, it wouldn't have been The Day the Earth Stood Still. But couldn't it have been something else? They could have taken that idea of global warming and make it an entirely different sci-fi movie on its own, rather than a remake of one of the most well-known sci-fi classics of all time. Naturally, a lot of people who love the original will be kind of biased, but I went in with an open mind and I found it to be entertaining. It didn't live up to its full potential, but it wasn't that bad either. Oh, and don't expect an ending, because it doesn't have one. The Thing was based off a short 1938 novel, Who Goes There, by John W. Campbell Jr. It was about a bunch of scientists in the Antarctic who find a frozen spacecraft and its alien visitor. The 1951 movie changes things around a little. The first thing is the title, and by the way, it's one of the best title screens ever. As for location, it takes place in the North Pole rather than the South. Never could a movie and book both take place on complete opposite sides of the Earth and still not even matter one bit. As far as the plot goes, the film only seems to follow the first part of the novel. They find the spacecraft in the ice. They all gather around to determine that it's saucer-shaped. They try to blow it out with dynamite, accidentally destroying the ship and therefore losing the discovery of a lifetime. However, they find one of the aliens and bring it back to their camp. In a frozen state of hibernation, the thing thaws thanks to some dumbass putting an electric blanket over it. The thing escapes and goes on a rampage, and this is where the movie really differs from the book. In the book, the alien is able to assimilate its victims by multiplying and taking on the victim's likeness. In the movie, its body is made of vegetable, it feeds on blood, and if it loses a limb, it can grow it back. It doesn't really kill a lot of people, which is a little disappointing. Most of the scientists want the creature dead, but there's a classic archetype mad scientist who wants to preserve the creature and learn from it. The dialogue is really good for a 1950s movie. The characters' lines overlap one another, and it sounds much like they're really talking and not just reciting lines from a script. But this is common in producer Howard Hawks' movies. He's done comedies before, like Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday, but never a horror movie. Speaking of comedy, there's a very subtle sense of humor going on.
What'd you say the number of that bulletin was?
629-49, item 6700, extract 75,131.
Oh, that one.
There's a lot of suspense as you're always anticipating when the thing will show up next, but in a good way, and it also ends with one of the most famous and chilling science fiction movie lines ever spoken.
Watch the skies, everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the skies.
The Thing from Another World has been colorized and most notably remade by John Carpenter. The 1982 remake, simply titled The Thing, owes a lot to the original. It recreates the awesome title screen, but it omits the whole scene where they blow the spacecraft out of the ice. However, they actually make reference to it as if they're referring to the team from the first movie, so in some strange kind of way, it's almost like a sequel. But this time it sticks closer to the rest of the book. It takes place in the Antarctic, and the Thing is able to assimilate its victims like in the novel. What happens here is that whenever somebody comes in contact with the Thing, they become the Thing. But first, it turns itself inside out with guts and gore squishing all over the place. You never actually see anything of the creature, that is, anything definite. It's just a blob of grotesque body parts. Roger Ebert called it a great barf bag movie, but I'd go further to say this is a movie that forces you to puke, then shoves your face in it and makes you eat it, then barf it up again. It's absolutely repulsive and a great testament to the wonders of special effects that are not CG. It's a showstopper and it kind of weakens the rest of the film. That's a problem that the original didn't have. The whole film was consistently strong, but this one feels very lopsided, and on a first viewing you may find yourself feeling that it's very slow and that you're waiting for something to happen. However, on repeated viewings, this movie is actually very good in its own right. The cold, barren setting subjects you to the isolation that the characters are going through. They grow more and more paranoid because they don't know who's real and who's the Thing. So it's a much darker movie than the original and very nerve-wracking, and again, in a good way. But like I said, the special effects, as amazing as they really are a showstopper, and I always feel that the less graphic a movie can be, the more effective it can be in the long run. The classic version didn't need all those effects. It's the age-old saying that less is more. John Carpenter was very much a fan of the original. He used clips of it in Halloween when they're watching it on the TV. He obviously had great respect for it, and if you're going to remake a movie, why make it the same, especially when the original was so different from its source material. So, what he's accomplished is in fact a great remake which complements the original. Both have their own strengths, and even though I always prefer the original for its characters, its humor, and atmosphere, I love them both. But why remake it again? Supposedly it's being done, but for God's sake, is it really necessary? Earth versus the Flying Saucers. This 1956 classic is the epitome of UFO pop culture. Whenever you think of alien spaceships, instantly what comes to mind is a saucer shape. Real-life witness accounts and photographs have always depicted the flying saucer. Whether you're a skeptic or believer, this is the classic image and this is the classic film. The plot is nothing more than a blunt, full-scale invasion where the saucers come in and attack major cities around the world. The special effects were done by stop-motion pioneer Ray Harryhausen. He built miniature saucers and not only made them look like they were flying, but tilting and spinning too. You never see the strings. With today's technology, they could be digitally removed, but Harryhausen had to paint the strings so that they would blend into the background, kind of like a chameleon, which meant constantly repainting them as the background tones would change. The final scene where the saucers destroy Washington, D.C. is one of the most memorable scenes in the history of science fiction cinema. Today, the effects seem outdated and the whole concept cliché in general, but this movie still holds up today. It's entertaining, and the stop-motion quality gives the saucers an unearthly style, which is very appropriate. While thankfully no direct remake has ever been made, two movies, both in 1996, draw major similarities. The first one I'll mention is Mars Attacks, a comedy directed by Tim Burton. It's like a monster run-amok film like Gremlins. A bunch of crazy, silly aliens come down and go on a rampage, defacing many of the world's famous landmarks, including the Washington Monument, a reference to Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Their spacecrafts are also equipped with the same style ray gun. It's an affectionate spoof. But the big one is Independence Day. This movie, again, while not a remake, it's the closest thing, the modern-day equivalent of Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Again, we have alien spacecrafts destroying the world's landmarks, but it goes beyond being a cliched imitator. The scene of the White House being destroyed is, in its own right, a memorable movie scene. The aliens look like maybe Predator or Aliens. While not very original, the special effects were pretty awesome. This is, of course, the first in a string of summer movies starring Will Smith. He's great as the comedic relief, and he helps lift the entertainment value. The movie has an American overtone where we fought for our independence, which seems to be an attempt at lifting it from just being a dumb alien invasion movie, but it only makes it dumber. Lots of people have criticized it for this and for some of the action scenes defying their suspension of disbelief. Even today, it's popular to say that this movie is ass. But it's a typical summer blockbuster. What more do you want? Bottom line, they could have easily called it Earth versus the Flying Saucers because it's so similar. But they didn't, and that's proof that you can take an old idea and make it something new without making it a remake. So check in for part 2. We're going to discuss War of the Worlds and Invaders from Mars. Welcome to part 2. I'm talking about 1950s alien invader movies and their remakes. War of the Worlds. From H.G. Wells to Orson Welles to Spielberg, War of the Worlds has had quite a history. It began with a novel by H.G. Wells published in 1898. Martian war machines come to Earth to wipe us out. It was a terrifying concept, and the idea of giant robotic fighting vehicles marching around blasting heat rays was an awesome idea. Where do you think they got the idea in Star Wars? In 1938, it was adapted into a radio drama by Orson Welles. It was done in the style of a live newscast, so people who tuned in late thought it was real, and that caused mass hysteria. In 1953, there was the classic movie. It begins with an epic narration about the preceding world wars. Then, after the credits, it goes into another chilling narration about all the planets in the solar system and why the Martians chose Earth. It's a great opening. The movie takes many liberties with the book. It changes its time period from the time the book was written to the time the movie was made. It changes the location from England to California, and rather than the tripod war machines, the Martians use hovering spacecrafts. And they're not the cliched flying saucers. For 1953, they look amazing. Not to mention, it's in color, unlike most science fiction movies of the time, or ones that would even follow for a decade. The sound effects are outstanding. The army tries to fight back, but nothing stops them. They even use an atom bomb, but it doesn't do a damn thing. Aside from sheer spectacle, the suspense is great too. You hardly see the Martians, you only catch a few glimpses and you never see their whole body. Other movies would have taken all that hard work for the alien effect and milked it for all it's worth. I love this movie. I think it's by far the best alien invader movie of the 50s. In 1988, there was actually a sequel in the form of a TV series which ran for 2 seasons. The first episode was a 90-minute feature-length special which continued the story of the original film, taking place many years later. Originally, the series was planned in the 70s and conceived by the original film's producer, George Powell, who passed away before it finally saw the light of day. It also uses the same spacecrafts. Nothing was changed, and the special effects were indistinguishable from the original movie. The only major difference is the Martians. Now they disguise themselves as humans. A third arm bursts out of the chest and gouges out the eyes of the victim. For a TV show, it was pretty violent, and it scared the shit out of me as a kid. Those 3 fingers would haunt my dreams. But now, fast forward to June 2005. This would be a crazy special month for some reason, because this is when the War of the Worlds remake would come out. All 3 of them. Yes, take your time to wrap your head around this. There were 3 remakes of War of the Worlds, and all 3 of them came out in June of 2005. What was that about? June 14th, there was H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, directed by Timothy Hines. This one went direct to DVD. Unlike the others, this one takes place in the novel's original time period, and it makes a point to follow the novel almost word for word. And guess what? It has a runtime of 3 hours, which is insane. I guess that's what happens when you literally transcribe a book to a movie. I have to say, for an independent film, it's highly commendable and it must have been a lot of work to pull off, but it's a shame that it looks like shit. The dialogue sounds as if the actors are reading straight from the book. Maybe it's the way it translated from page to screen. And as for the special effects, well, they're not so special. Computer-generated effects are something that has to be pulled off perfectly, which it rarely is, even in big-budget Hollywood blockbusters. But here, the CG just looks awful. The aliens look like they belong in a video game. People are engulfed in CG flame and turned to skeletons. It's offsetting and laughable. And so much of the scenery is obvious green screen, even things that seem simple to do without the aid of a green screen. In some scenes, even the buildings are CG. If you just caught a glimpse, you wouldn't even know it was a live-action movie. Even the mustaches are fake. This is like an Ed Wood movie. But like I said, this is not a big-budget film. According to IMDb, it only cost $5,000. If you accept the terrible effects, it almost becomes a style, sort of. It's nice to see such an ambitious attempt at adapting the novel in extreme detail, but it makes you wish that it was done by a major studio instead. And 3 hours is kinda tough to watch. Of course, I found out later that there's been new cuts. There's a new edition called The Classic War of the Worlds, and that's 2 hours and 5 minutes. If you're curious enough, check it out. Then there was another one with the same title, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, directed by David Michael Latt. This one again was direct to DVD, and it was rushed out on June 28th, a day before the Spielberg version. Like the original, it takes place in the present day, rather than in 1898. In general, it's so much different, I almost wonder why it couldn't be called something other than War of the Worlds. In fact, it has an alternate title, The Invasion, but it's hardly used. In comparison to the last one we saw, the actors are much more believable and the special effects are a million times better, but that's not saying too much. The Martian war machines are like giant crab monsters, which is fine, and there's also some great apocalyptic scenery. For a budget of $1 million, it's not bad. It looks like something that could have been released in theaters, but comparing it to the $132 million Spielberg version and the abundance of alien invader movies out there, this one just blends into the crowd and it becomes mediocre. This movie actually had a sequel, War of the Worlds 2, The Next Wave, released in 2008, but let's not get into it because we'll be here forever. And at last, on June 29th, we had the Spielberg version starring Tom Cruise. This is the one that most people know about. After all, it's the only one released in theaters of the June 2005 War of the Worlds remake trilogy. Again, it was a modern-day retelling, and for what it wasn't bad. It seemed most people hated this movie, but I didn't really expect much. It has some great special effects, like when the ray guns are blasting people to bits. But other times, like when the alien probe goes into the house, it's obvious CG and it looks like ass. Even the original probe looked better. What I really liked was some of the long takes. The camera becomes a character itself and it really puts you into the situation. I feel as if this movie did a good job showing people's emotions to the crisis, and it kinda helped to give it that modern day, post 9/11 subjective view, but in the end, it's just an alien movie, nothing special. I prefer the original by far. It has a charm that could never be matched. What really turned me off personally was that 3 remakes all at the same time, coincidence or not, it was just overkill and it was confusing. Invaders from Mars. Invaders from Mars came out in 1953, the same year as War of the Worlds. It also dealt with Martians and also done in color. This is the cheap-ass one, the poor man's War of the Worlds, but it has its own unique style.
What happened to your net? It looks like there's a...
Nothing. I caught it on a barbed wire fence.
barbed wire, but there isn't any barbed wire between...
I caught it on barbed wire, I said!
Everything takes place from the perspective of a young boy. It seems all the aliens in the movie are something a kid would come up with. The main Martian is just a head with tentacles. Kinda reminds me of Krang from Ninja Turtles. The other aliens look like they're wearing pajamas. All the artificialness gives it this surreal, supernatural environment. Even the color is kinda weird, depending on the print I guess, but it's just kinda strange. It's the quintessential cheesy alien invader movie, but for what it is, it works. In 1986, there was a remake by the same title, directed by Tobe Hooper, who brought us horror classics such as Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. The remake follows the original pretty closely, even down to that old weird-looking fence. Again, it succeeds in putting you into the child's perspective, reminding you that dark time when your imagination would run wild. It's not a great movie by any means, but if you just look at the cover, what do you expect? If a B movie is what you want, then it's what you get. The alien effects are delightfully cheesy. Now look at the alien leader, now I can really see that as Krang. Creatures from the 80s were the best. This is before CG came along and took a shit all over everything. There's nothing like seeing a good old animatronic monster, but they're not as awesome as the Gremlins or Critters, and it tends to get overshadowed by everything else that was out at the time. One of the props being used is actually a recycled tricorder from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Another piece of trivia, Jim Hunt, who plays a police chief, was the same actor who played David, the young boy from the original. To sum things up, both versions are okay. The special effects each represent the decade in which they were made. It wasn't one of the best invasion classics to begin with, but still worth a look. Check in for part 3, the final part. We're going to talk about Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the Blob. Welcome to part 3, the conclusion. I'm talking about 1950s alien invader movies and their remakes. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It was based on the 1955 novel The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, not to be confused with the 1884 novel The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson, which was made into a movie in 1945 starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. Now that I've confused the hell out of you, let's move on. The 1956 movie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is a movie without much special effects. It's about a doctor who finds a bunch of people who think that their family members are not themselves, but rather an imposter taking on their likeness. The doctor thinks it's mass hysteria, but slowly discovers the truth that an alien race is coming down in seed pods. Once they hatch, so to say, they take on the appearance of the nearest human, and then when the human goes to sleep, they become the alien, or something like that. Like I said, it doesn't have much special effects, but it's real entertaining. The Doctor is telling us the story, so we see everything unfold from his point of view. This is what I like, because it really subjects you to his character, and his narration makes it feel like a detective movie. You really feel the paranoia going on, that you can't trust anyone around you. Often, this movie's been analyzed a bit too much. Some people say it has something to do with communism, but I never looked into it that deep. Either way, it's a classic, and it's one that's been referenced countless times. There is a Bugs Bunny parody, Invasion of the Bunny Snatchers, and in Gremlins, they're watching it on the TV. Like any classic, it's been remade more than once. Here we have the 1978 version of the same title. What I like about this one is that it helps clarify how the pod people take over. Once the duplicate becomes conscious, the original person pretty much dies when they go to sleep. In the first movie, it doesn't really make much sense. When the Doctor's love interest goes to sleep, she immediately becomes the imposter, but then where does the duplicate go, and what's the point of even having it? This one makes a little more sense. There's also some pretty good special effects. When the pod people are born, you see it happen in explicit detail. This is one moment when it's definitely stronger than the original film. The title sequence showing outer space and the pod's descent to the Earth is really neat. It's almost like an old documentary you'd see in science class. The whole movie has a lot of interesting camera work and weird music. At times, it feels like a 70s acid fest. It's a little bit too weird. I feel as if it's trying too hard to be artsy and the pace very drawn out and slow. At 1 hour and 55 minutes, it's way too long. Just a little trivia, the star of the first movie, Kevin McCarthy, has a cameo. And you know what? That reminds me, that's what I miss most. The first movie had a voice from the Doctor's perspective. You follow him around and feel as if you are the character.
A woman who said her uncle wasn't her uncle, but I didn't listen.
But here, it doesn't have that. You have all these different characters, but none of them do you actually latch onto. In 1993, there was another remake, just called Body Snatchers. It changes the main setting from a small town to an army base, and it centers around a family who works there, or something. The seed pods have tentacles which crawl into the body of the victim and literally suck out their identity. Inside the pod, the duplicate takes form, and once alive, it disposes of the victim. And whenever a pod person notices a real person, they point and do this obnoxious scream. The movie's short, but it trudges along at a snail's pace. It doesn't get interesting until about 45 minutes in. It captures the paranoia and it has some funny moments, like a kid falling from the sky. It's not too bad, but it's not memorable by any means. In 2007, it was remade again, this time called The Invasion. So it seems now they just keep using different pieces of the title just to make it sound original. But wasn't The Invasion the alternate title of one of the War of the Worlds remakes? Oh, I don't care. This time, there's more of a technical explanation of how people become the alien imposter. A human first becomes contaminated, and then when they sleep, the alien spores take over the brain. It's a lot like a disease, and it's spread by being puked in the face. You don't get any more blunt than that. The special effects are minimal but explicit. It's what you expect from a contemporary movie like this. It has a famous cast. Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman are the stars. But is it any good? Well, it's not too bad, but by today's standards, it's nothing special. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of those movies where every time they remake it, it reflects the social anxieties of the time, so filmmakers feel the need to keep updating it for modern audiences. And it's also such a broad concept that every time they remake it, each version stands apart. So what it comes down to is that it's just a very remakeable movie. The Blob. The 1958 classic is one of my favorites of the Alien Invasion Monster on the Loose franchise. A meteor crashes to Earth, bringing with it an alien life form that's hungry for humans. But this alien doesn't have crazy eyes or tentacles or any real features, it's just, well, a blob. A bloodthirsty mass of space slime. The simplicity of it is ingenious. As it absorbs people, it grows in size and becomes more red. It's a great concept. While modern moviegoers might laugh at its primitive special effects and obvious use of miniatures, this is not a movie about visual effects and to me rises above the typical B-movie. The best thing about it is Steve McQueen. This is the movie that got him his start in acting. He plays a teenager, even though he was about 28 at the time. Instantly, he's a funny and likable character, and that's what keeps this movie so interesting. It's a story of Boy Cried Wolf. The teenagers are causing trouble, playing pranks, and racing cars backwards. But then, when they learn of the Blob, none of the adults and authorities believe them, so they have to take care of things themselves. It's groundbreaking in a sense that it's one of the first movies of this kind to portray young kids as the heroes. Another thing that makes the movie so charming is its 1950s setting. The cars, the clothes, the way people talk, the movie-going experience. It's so obvious that it's the 50s that it becomes an authentic cliche of itself.
Right here at the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, is where the movie's key scene took place, where everybody runs out from the Blob.
And that's another reason why this movie is so appealing. It takes place in a regular small town where every year they celebrate Blob Fest, where all kinds of madness goes on. This one I attended happened to be the Blob's 50th anniversary. There was a Steve McQueen lookalike contest, vintage vehicles, some of which are from the movie, and of course a screening of the Blob in the very same theater in which its most memorable scene takes place. It's like living the movie, quite literally, because everyone reenacts the running out scene. It's an experience that this video can't do justice. And courtesy of prop collector Wes Shank, the Blob itself makes an appearance. Yes, the actual Blob from the movie. It's interesting how this whole event brings everyone in the town together. The same way in the movie, the Blob invades the very same town, and in the end, everyone has to work together. That's where the movie really resonates with me.
If people are having fun, you throw in human spirit, you throw in alcohol, it's a guaranteed good time.
But now, let's get to the sequel. In 1972, there was Son of Blob. Well, that's what it was called when I saw it on TV, hosted by Grandpa.
So who'd you expect, Mr. Spot? It's me, Grandpa!
But more commonly, it's called Beware the Blob, as in beware this movie. Everything I love about the original is absent here. It's still very low budget, but this time it doesn't work in its favor. There's no likable characters. All you have is the Blob, and you just want to see it devour everybody because you don't care. It makes you wish the effects were better because this movie doesn't really have anything else going for it. One of the Blob's first victims is a kitten. Like, come on, that's not even fair. There's one part where someone is actually watching the first Blob on TV. So how this is a sequel, I guess it isn't. It's like in Halloween 3 when they're watching Halloween. It makes no sense, and even though it may be a funny joke or nod to the original, all it does is make you wish that you're watching the original instead. It's as if the best part of the movie is seeing the first movie within the movie, and for that, it's the only good part, but that doesn't count. The 1988 remake is more worthwhile. There aren't any actors as charismatic as Steve McQueen, but they all do their job. It's entertaining in the same way as any slasher movie from the 80s. The Blob effects have a substantial update. This time, they look pretty decent. A year later, Ghostbusters 2 used similar effects for the River of Slime, an obvious tribute to the Blob. But the neatest thing about the 80s Blob is when it devours people, you actually see what happens to their bodies. That's the only thing the original didn't have, gore. But I couldn't imagine this happening in the original. It didn't need it. This is a different movie, and this one is all about special effects. Bring on the Blob, bring on the gore. It's awesome. I still prefer the original, but I'm happy with both versions because they're so different. But there's been talk of yet another remake in the works. Undeniably, it's going to be all CG, which is going to lose all the appeal of both the 50s and 80s special effects. I don't think we need to see another Blob movie, but let's see what the folks at Blobfest have to say.
We watched the 1988 remake last night on pay-per-view, or actually on demand. And that was actually pretty slick as far as production values go. I can't imagine they could do better than that as far as effects go.
I think if they make a remake, they should make a remake and not go wild and you don't even recognize what it is anymore.
Generally, what happens when they remake these movies is they're trying to capitalize on the name only, but the people who know the name, those are the people who grew up loving the original film. So if you're going to use the name and people haven't seen the original, I don't know what sense that is.
The last I heard, the Blob was, biological weapon that gets loose from a government lab, which is a nice idea, I guess. But let's not call it the Blob. Call it something else. Go a slightly different tack and let the Blob exist as it is.
The Blob you're talking about, the remake, are the ones where you fill in the blanks because you created sometimes worse than the effects guys can. Although it was fun seeing people being dissolved by the new Blob, of course, because I'm an effects guy. When I watch a movie, I'm in effects mode.
Maybe the less said, the better. I think they should just keep showing the original over and over again. You're never going to top it. It's never going to tarnish the original, though. That's for sure.
To sum things up, while the remakes are more sophisticated, the originals were so much more groundbreaking for their time. But the fact is, there's going to be more remakes, and more than we can even begin to guess. The real tragedy is that modern moviegoers are usually more interested in the newer movies. There's a lot of people who actually refuse to watch black and white movies, just because they're black and white, and that's just sad. But on a lighter note, most of these Alien Invasion remakes were quite good. With a remake, there has to be a perfect balance. They can't completely copy the original because that's a waste of film.
So, you made the movie, and now you want to make it again?
No.
And they can't completely stray from the original idea, or else what's the point of sharing the same title? And even if you totally hate the remakes, the originals still exist. But on the other hand, it sometimes buries the originals. Like if you go into a video store and ask for a movie, you may get the remake, and younger generations may not even be aware that it's a remake. On the other hand, you can say that when a remake comes out, it draws more attention and introduces people to the original. Bottom line, remakes can be done well, but it's our mission to make sure that the originals are never forgotten.